Before we get into the case tonight, I want to thank the show's sponsor, BetterHelp, for helping keep the flame lit of the campfire for this episode. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service that's 100% online. So you don't have that awkwardness of sitting in a waiting room with a whole bunch of other strangers waiting to see your therapist. With BetterHelp, you have access to a network of over 25,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with whatever you're dealing with. All you have to do to get started is answer some questions about what your needs and preferences are in therapy. So that way, BetterHelp can match you with a therapist that is right for you. And if you want to change your therapist because maybe you're not comfortable with them, you can change your therapist at any time for no additional charge. You also don't have to wait any specific time or any number of sessions to change your therapist. So when you match up with that right therapist, you can talk to your therapist however is most comfortable for you, whether it's text, chat, phone, or video. You can also message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you and your schedule. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you, with more scheduling flexibility and more affordable prices. So if you go to the website and use the show's code, betterhelp.com/CCC, not only does that let them know that you heard it at the campfire, but you'll also receive 10% off your first month. So that's betterhelp.com/CCC. BetterHelp, HELP.com/CCC. And I'll also have a link provided in the show notes. We've talked about a couple of serial killers already who were angels of death. We've discussed the reasoning behind why they became angels of death. Although their motives may not be so clear, this case is no different. Although there may be some argument of whether or not they were a serial killer or a mass murderer. For this case, we're in New Jersey again. A lot of people, or most people, probably already know who we're going to discuss tonight. This case had a Netflix movie done on it called The Good Nurse. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It was a pretty decent movie and factually pretty accurate as well. Welcome to the campfire. Grab your s'mores and grab a seat. Thanks for joining me tonight around the fire where we discuss the dark world of true crime. This is the Campfire Crime Chronicles, a true crime podcast. And this is the case of Charles Cullen, New Jersey's Angel of Death. Charles Cullen was born February 22nd, 1960 in West Orange, New Jersey. He was the last of 8 children, and he was raised by a deeply religious Catholic family. Cullen would have a rough childhood. He suffered with mental illness and would consistently be bullied by his sister's boyfriend as well as his classmates at school. Cullen would have a very unstable frame of mind. Cullen attempted suicide for the first time at 9 years old by drinking chemicals that he had taken from a chemistry set. This would be the first of 20 such suicide attempts throughout his life. Growing up, Cullen had few friends and was often teased in school. The teasing turned into bullying by high school, and he once attended a party where his bullies were also attending and then torment Cullen. Cullen would retaliate by spiking their drinks with rat poison. The rat poison didn't result in any deaths, which was lucky for him. When Cullen was 17 in 1977, his mother would die in a car accident. This would devastate Cullen, not only because it was the loss of his mother, which is traumatic enough, but also suffering from mental illness would intensify his grief. In his teen years, he fell in love with the works of Dostoevsky, particularly the novel Crime and Punishment, which tells the story of a man who commits murder. Around the same time, Cullen's mother was killed in the car accident. A year later, Cullen would drop out of high school. Following his drop from high school, he would join the Navy, serving on a submarine USS Woodrow Wilson and ranking up to petty officer. Cullen would often be bullied by his colleagues as well, and he would be seen wearing a surgical mask, gown, and gloves by one of his officers instead of his uniform that he had taken from the medical cabinets. He would be transferred to a ship to finish his time in the Navy, where he would again attempt suicide several times over the course of several years. And then after his last attempt, he would receive a medical discharge in 1984. Following his exit from the Navy, Cullen would join the Mountainside Hospital School of Nursing to obtain his RN, which is registered nurse. He would graduate as a nurse in 1986, starting his career at St. Barnabas Medical Center, located in Livingston, New Jersey, in 1987. When he would become a nurse, he would often fantasize about using the drugs he had access to and take them to commit suicide. In one of his attempts at suicide, he jabbed scissors in his head, where he was rushed to the hospital and would require major surgery. That same year, he married Adrienne Taub, where the couple would have 2 daughters. It wouldn't be long until Cullen would turn into an angel of death, beginning to kill patients during his time at St. Barnabas Hospital. Cullen committed his first murder on June 11th, 1988. It was Judge John W. Yengo, Sr., and he had been admitted to St. Barnabas Medical Center for an allergic reaction to blood-thinning drugs that he was taking. Cullen administered a lethal dose of medication intravenously. An investigation would be done that would find contaminated IV bags, which would point to Cullen, but it was never proven. Cullen would quit his job at St. Barnabas in January of 1992 when the hospital authorities began investigating who might have tampered with the IV bags and would start becoming suspicious of Cullen. After Cullen had left St. Barnabas, he would begin working at the Warren Hospital. While employed there, he would continue his trend of murder, and he would murder 3 elderly patients with an OD of dioxin. His final victim would state that a sneaky male nurse had injected her as she was sleeping, but family members and other health care workers dismissed her comments. In January of 93, Adrienne Cullen filed for divorce, which she would later file 2 domestic violence complaints against him. The divorce papers and domestic violence complaints depicted Cullen as an alcoholic and was someone who abused pets by placing them in bowling bags and trash cans, and then poured lighter fluid into other people's drinks and made prank calls to funeral homes. Cullen had shared custody of his daughters and moved into a basement apartment on Schaefer Avenue in Phillipsburg. Cullen would state in a statement that he wanted to get out of nursing in 93, however, he was forced to stay in it with the court-ordered child support. In March of 93, he broke into a coworker's home while she and her young son were sleeping, but left without waking them. Cullen then started calling her frequently, leaving numerous messages and following her at work and around town. The woman would file a complaint, and Cullen pled guilty to trespassing and was placed on 1 year's probation. The day after his arrest, Cullen attempted suicide. He took 2 months off of work and was treated for depression in 2 psychiatric facilities. He attempted suicide 2 more times before the end of that year. In September of 93, a cancer patient complained that Cullen had injected her with medication despite not being her assigned nurse. Cullen would pass a lie detector test, and then the charges would eventually be dropped. Cullen would leave Warren Hospital in December of 93 and take a job at Hunterdon Medical Center, which would begin early in the next year. Cullen worked in the hospital's ICU and cardiac care unit for 3 years. During his first 2 years, Cullen claims that he did not murder anyone, but hospital records for the time period had already been destroyed at the time of the arrest in 2003, preventing any investigation into his claims. However, Cullen did admit to murdering 5 patients in the first 9 months of 1996. Once more, Cullen administered overdoses of dioxin. During his time at both Hunterdon and Warren Medical Centers, he would be treated for depression. In 1994, Cullen would become a licensed RN in Pennsylvania. Cullen would find work at Morris Memorial Hospital in Morris, New Jersey. He would be fired in August of 97 for poor performance. He would be unemployed for 6 months and would stop making child support payments. In October of 97, Cullen would appear in Warren Hospital's emergency room and sought treatment for depression. He was admitted to a psychiatric facility, but left a short time later. His treatment had not improved his mental health. Neighbors said that he would be found chasing cats down the street in the dead of night, yelling or talking to himself, and making faces at people when he thought they weren't looking. In February of 1998, Cullen was hired by Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He worked in a ward for patients who needed ventilators to breathe. In May of that year, Cullen would file for bankruptcy, claiming nearly $67,000 in debt. Then in October of 98, Cullen would be fired from Liberty after he was seen entering a patient's room with syringes in his hand. The patients ended up with a broken arm, but apparently no injections were made. Cullen was accused of giving patients drugs at unscheduled times. So we're up to 1998 now, and Liberty was the first facility to accuse Cullen and actually take action against him for doing what he's been doing the whole time, and no other facility has investigated Cullen. Which, as we get more into the episode, it'll probably make more sense why they didn't, because another hospital does the same thing and tries to brush this under the rug. Cullen would then go to work for Elston Hospital in Elston, Pennsylvania, from November of 98 to March of 1999. On December 30th of 98, he would go into murdering yet another patient with dioxin. A coroner's blood test showed lethal amounts of dioxin in the patient's blood, but an investigation was inconclusive and nothing pointed definitively to Cullen as the murderer. In 99, there would be a nursing shortage, and technology at the time wasn't able to report or show individuals who had made or had mental health issues or employment issues like Cullen would have. With the nursing shortage being what it was easy for Cullen to find work quickly between jobs. In March of 99, Cullen was hired and began working at Lehigh Valley Hospital. While he was at Lehigh Valley, he would successfully kill one patient and also attempt to kill another. He would resign from Lehigh Valley just after a month in April of 99 and then go to St. Luke's Hospital over in Bethlehem. While working at St. Luke's, he would be in the cardiac unit where he would kill 5 people. In January of 2000, Cullen would attempt suicide. He placed a charcoal grill in his bathtub and was hoping that the CO gas would kill him. Neighbors would smell the smoke and call the fire department and the police department. When they arrived, he was taken to the hospital and then again to a psychiatric facility. However, he would be released and be home the following day. While Colin was at St. Luke's, no one at first suspected him of murdering patients until his colleagues discovered vials of medicine in disposal bags. The drugs had no street value outside of the hospital, nor were they drugs that were typically used from recreational drug users, which made the theft of the drugs suspicious. After an investigation, it was determined that Colin had taken the drugs, and he would be fired from St. Luke's and escorted from the hospital in June of 2002. 7 of his former co-workers at St. Luke's would file a complaint against him with Lehigh Valley's district attorney with their suspicions of Colin murdering patients with the stolen drugs. They pointed out that between January and June of 2002, Colin had worked 20% of the hours on his unit but was present for nearly 2/3 of the death. But investigators never looked into Colin's past, and the case was dropped 9 months later for lack of evidence. For a brief time, he would work at Sacred Heart Hospital in Allentown, Pennsylvania. However, he would leave there shortly after not getting along with his coworkers. In September of 2002, Colin joined Somerset Medical Center in Somerset, New Jersey. He would work in the critical care unit, and he would befriend fellow coworker and nurse Amy Logren. The two would become close as Amy suffered from a heart condition where Colin found her one day gasping for breath, and that's when she would confess to Collins about her condition. Colin would help Amy with dealing with her medical issues as she was trying to buy time until her health insurance kicked in. Colin and Amy would begin dating, and Colin would help Amy by cooking dinner for her and her children and help her kids with their homework so Amy would be able to rest. And this is where the movie A Good Nurse picks up with Colin and Amy at Somerset Hospital or Somerset Medical Center. So this is where Colin would begin to get on the radar of his coworkers, and then an investigation would begin from law enforcement. Then on June 18th, 2003, Colin would attempt to murder a patient, Philip Grigger, who was a patient at Somerset Medical Center. Grigger would be discharged but would die 6 months later of natural causes. In July of 2003, Somerset would become suspicious of the suspicious deaths. Coworkers of Colin would notice him in patients' rooms that he wasn't assigned to, and also the computer system was recording him accessing insulin for patients that weren't his or patients that did not need insulin. Then someone from Somerset would call the Poison Information and Education Center about the deaths, and the executive director would advise Somerset Medical Center that they needed to contact the authorities because they had someone killing patients at their hospital. 3 months would go by before the hospital would contact authorities. Colin would kill 5 more patients, and in that time, and attempting to kill a 6th. According to reports, Colin would begin having sex with his victims as well. The New Jersey state officials would fine and penalize Somerset Medical Center for failing to report a non-fatal insulin overdose that occurred in August of 2003. The overdose was administered by Colin, and when another patient would die by Colin's hand in October, an investigation into Colin would begin, starting with his employment history, which would reveal suspicious deaths and Cullen's involvement with those deaths. I want to thank the show's sponsor, BetterHelp, for helping keep the flame lit of the campfire for this episode. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service that's 100% online. So you don't have that awkwardness of sitting in a waiting room with a whole bunch of other strangers waiting to see your therapist. With BetterHelp, you have access to a network of over 25,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with whatever you're dealing with. All you have to do to get started is answer some questions about what your needs and preferences are in therapy. So that way, BetterHelp can match you with a therapist that is right for you. And if you want to change your therapist because maybe you're not comfortable with them, you can change your therapist at any time for no additional charge. You also don't have to wait any specific time or any number of sessions to change your therapist. So when you match up with that right therapist, you can talk to your therapist however is most comfortable for you, whether it's text, chat, phone, or video. You can also message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you and your schedule. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you with more scheduling flexibility and more affordable prices. So if you go to the website and use the show's code, betterhelp.com/CCC, not only does that let them know that you heard it at the campfire, but you'll also receive 10% off your first month. So that's betterhelp.com/CCC, BetterHelp, HELP.com/CCC. And I'll also have a link provided in the show notes. Detectives would begin their investigation, and during their investigation, found some questionable facts about Charles Cullen. This would lead detectives to interview Amy Logren, who initially defended Cullen and spoke highly of him. It would take some time before Amy would realize the truth about her friend. When Amy did begin looking into Cullen herself, she would look over his past charts and find that they were full of errors, misspellings, as well as misreported observations. The system through which Amy had accessed Cullen's records showed an unusual amount of surfing behavior on his part, as he was spending a lot of time looking at the records of patients that weren't his. A piece of evidence that would stand out to Amy was that she found an unusual combination of drugs that Charles ordered, and the list of drugs observed by Amy included medicines that were given to patients in the cardiac unit. And this concerned Amy because Charles worked in the ICU, not the cardiac unit. Amy continued looking into Cullen's past history and learned that former co-workers from previous hospitals suspected him, with evidence pointing towards him but not definitive, that he had killed patients before either resigning or being fired from those facilities. Amy would begin to distance herself from Cullen. However, Cullen would continue to call and show up unannounced. One night, Amy would come home from one of her shifts and find Cullen playing with her children on the floor, leaving a very uneasy feeling with her. After a young female patient dies, Amy suspects that it was Cullen's doing. Believing that he was contaminating IV bags with insulin, Amy agrees to help detectives with their investigation, and detectives have the body of the patient exhumed to have tests run to confirm their suspicion. Somerset Medical Center could fire Cullen, which would be on Halloween of October 31st, 2003, for lying on his job application. Police would continue on surveilling Cullen for several weeks while they were finishing up their investigation on him. While working on their investigation, police detectives recruited Amy to help collect evidence on Cullen. This investigation would take about a month before police would collect enough evidence to be able to arrest him in December of 2003. Detectives had Amy wear a wire and meet Cullen at a restaurant, which was a diner, and she would go by a script that she had rehearsed with detectives. Detectives didn't know about her heart condition, and her heart would be incredibly loud through the microphone that she was wearing. The way Cullen would avoid being caught, if you haven't figured it out yet, was that he would resign from hospitals before they had a chance to become suspicious of him and investigate him for the death. Other times, when the hospitals would become suspicious of him but had no evidence, they would just force him to resign or fire him. So after Amy had met with Charles at the restaurant and police were sitting and waiting for him outside, waiting to have enough evidence against him, they would arrest and charge Collins at that restaurant after his meeting with Amy. Collins was convicted in 2006 for murdering 29 patients with rogue injections while he had worked at New Jersey and Pennsylvania hospitals, including Hunterdon Medical Center and Somerset Medical Center. So, what was Collins' motive? No one really knows, but Charles Graeber, when writing his book about Charles Cullen and his crimes, spoke with Cullen. He never really said anything directly and often would shut down whenever he was asked about murder and motive. However, Graeber concluded that his motives was one, it was because he could, and it made him feel special and empowered, and a way for him to blow off steam. Graeber would go on to explain the second reason he gathered for the why behind the murders was that Cullen was compelled to intervene and also frame some of the murders as mercy and that they were mercy kills. I'm not so sure how much I believe the second reason. However, if there's any truth to the first reason as to why, that's about the lowest reason you can have, not that there's any good reason to ever kill someone or take a life. I believe his mental health was a factor even in high school when he was bullied and retaliated against his bullies by poisoning the drinks of his bullies was a sign of the inevitable. Cullen admitted to murdering 45 victims over the course of 16 years between 10 hospitals. Of those numbers, Cullen would admit to killing 11 patients at St. Barnabas, including an AIDS patient who died after being given an overdose of insulin. However, although unable to be proven, it's believed that he murdered between 400 to even 1,000 people. As part of his methods was injecting insulin into IV bags, it was referred to as a death lottery with patients. Cullen never picked his patients and was looked at and named New Jersey's most prolific serial killer. That concludes this case at the campfire. I know there's a lot more information that I didn't include in this story as there was a lot of information to cover. All resources used to gather information for the case include, but not limited to, news articles, reports, documentaries, as well as other sources. I appreciate everyone who has gathered by the campfire with me for this case. I appreciate all the support from all the listeners and supporters. Also, if you wish to support the show, you can support the show with the S'mores Fund through the website campfirecrimechronicles.com. or PayPal directly using the email campfirecrimechronicles@gmail.com. A link will be provided into the show notes. Also, don't forget about the merchandise store to get your t-shirts, mugs, bandanas, hoodies, as well as other merchandise. You can find links to the merch store on the website, and I will also provide links in the show notes. Don't forget to rate the show 5 stars wherever you're listening. It helps the show out a lot to get more recognition with the way the algorithms work, especially with the Apple Podcast. And tell everyone else about the show, friends, family, the guy behind you at the coffee shop that you're having small talk with while waiting for your order, Word of mouth is always the best way to get the word out about the show. Even though the show is still on a smaller scale compared to a lot of the other podcasts, we're still reaching listeners at a global level, which is awesome, and it's all thanks to you guys. I appreciate everyone's patience on this episode. Last week was a bit rough with my dog dying, and I also started a new job last weekend, so with everything that was happening, trying to get an episode done wasn't going to be able to happen. I appreciate everyone's patience and understanding. You guys and gals are amazing. So with that, join me next time in 2 weeks as we gather around the campfire for the next case that we dive into. Remember to sleep with one eye open. This is the Campfire Crime Chronicles, a true crime podcast.